Hello, my name is Kai, and welcome to Actually Sensible Transfers Liverpool. Now, before I get into it, I'd like to say thank you all for the 100 subscribers. I never would have expected to reach over 1,000 views on each of my first two videos so quickly. I appreciate all the support, and if you could go down below and subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter, that would be incredible. But anyway, let's get right into the video because there's a lot to talk about. So, this is our current squad depth, in my opinion. Now, the immediate problem that we're going to have is one of our left backs is probably going to leave. I'm going to guess Robertson because of potentially the salary problems with him being so expensive for this last year. We're also probably going to see Harvey Elliott depart this summer. Federico Chiesa is likely going to leave. I think Luis Diaz is almost guaranteed to leave. And Darwin Núñez. So that's 5 players that we're still expected to lose. And I've already gotten rid of Kwanzaa here because he's doing his biomedical as we speak. So the immediate problems that we see here is we're definitely going to need another midfielder, a striker, a versatile forward who can potentially cover both sides, and a center back. I think that Curtis will still do the role where he effectively plays as the 8 and the 10. So we're going to need a player who can also play as an 8, or either we would ideally need a player who can play as an 8 or a 6 to cover that position, because I don't think Slot's going to use Endo all that often, and also Endo could potentially be a 5th choice center back option as well. So ideally that's what we would go for. Now, to preface some things before we get into this, when we're looking at statistics for midfielders and defenders, it's actually very difficult to use the normal statistics that you would find on FBref or online to really analyze them. They're really just supplemental to what you've seen. So all of the players that I will suggest in this video, I've watched at least 5 or 6 full 90s of these players playing. So I can tell you that I know how they would fit and scale into Liverpool, and I'll mostly pick out the statistics that I think do reflect their game based on what I've seen. To start in the midfield, let's look at the current profiles that we have in the pivot, the 2 main ones. The first one we have is Alexis McAllister. What we know of Alexis is that he's a very aggressive midfielder. He's very good in possession. He's very rugged out of possession. That tends to be the case with a lot of the Argentinian midfielders. And Alexis is very good at connecting and linking up play. He can do it both deep and in the final third, which makes him a very good 8 for this team. And his discipline also helps a lot because although Alexis isn't the most mobile, he reads the game well enough that he can intercept the ball and make very intelligent tackles. Ryan has been playing very deep this season because he's our makeshift 6, and he boasts very high progressive carry stats. Ideally, our new 6 should be someone who boasts very high progressive passing stats, and especially very good deep progression stats. I want to see long balls completed because we essentially need to replace what Trent did at right back at the 6 position. You could also do it at the 8 position, but I don't really see a world where we drop Alexis McAllister. Instead, I would see a world where we're more likely to drop Ryan. That's not to say that he won't play. I still think he'll play a similar amount of games because he would immediately become second choice at both the 6 and the 8, with Curtis being third choice at the 8 and second choice / third choice at the 10, with Wataru Endo being probably 5th choice center back and third choice 6. That would be my ideal way of composing the squad. Our midfield target has to be a ball player, has to be positionally disciplined. I don't necessarily want someone who's Fabinho. I don't really need someone who's a very rugged Hoover who's just going to tackle everyone and win the ball. They should just be disciplined and good positionally to deal with counterattacks, especially a midfielder who's comfortable with drifting to either side in a makeshift back 3. And I also want them to be mobile. It's someone who can really move around because a lot of the time in big games, their partner is going to be Alexis, who isn't particularly mobile. So I would want someone who's at least similar in mobility to Ryan, who is fairly mobile. The ideal and obvious dream target in this would be Adam Wharton. Adam Wharton has very good stats in possession. He's very good with the ball. He doesn't really do a lot of carries, which is something that Ryan does do, but he is very good at passing the ball forward immediately after receiving it. He's very intelligent with his passing, and he's able to hit the ball long and very accurately, similar to how Trent did. He's also very good at intercepting the ball. He reads the game very well. He doesn't really need to make very aggressive interventions in order to win the ball, but he is capable of doing that. We haven't seen it as much at Palace because more often than not, one of the likes of Cheikh Doucouré or Jefferson Lerma would actually play the 6. But if you look back at his Blackburn Blackburn days, he actually more often than not did play the 6, and when you watch him, he is really capable of making these very intelligent tackles and interceptions that we might have seen less of at Palace. So I definitely think Adam Wharton would be the best option in our 6th position and would be the dream signing. The issue, of course, would be that he may be too expensive. Wharton would effectively play this role where he would drop between the center backs. This is, of course, what I talked about in the first video when I talked about Liverpool's structure, and he would drop between this back 3. Another really good benefit of Wharton would be that we could actually keep Van Dijk centrally, and there's a chance that he would drop here in a back 3, with him being on the left, Van Dijk centrally, and Konate on the right. With Wharton, since he has very high left-sided bias, he likes to stick to the left side of the pitch, would definitely be able to play that role and progress the ball from deep. And since he's so capable of hitting these long passes, could replicate some kind of relationship with Salah, or even down the line to Florian Wirtz, and even to a willing runner like Jeremy Frimpong. Ideally, he would fix most of our build-up issues and allow us to be a much more stable side in possession. But, of course, like I said, the problem with Wharton is going to be the price. So that doesn't really make him a sensible transfer, especially because of the massive outlay that we put for Florian Wirtz already, and potential outlays for even someone like Alexander Isak. What's the next best option? Well, Angelo Stiller. Angelo Stiller still boasts very good progressive passing stats while being much less mobile and weaker defensively. Now, of course, this is in the Bundesliga, so you could take it with a grain of salt, but when you watch Stiller play, it's very clear that because of his mobility problems, he has to have developed into a very good passer. He's very similar to Zubimendi, albeit he's much worse defensively, both positionally and in terms of actually being like a more rugged, mobile defender. The other issue with Stiller is, unlike Wharton, he's not really capable of playing as a 6, which means that the only real 6 in our team would still be Wataru Endo. I don't really have to show you what Stiller would look like on the board. He would almost identically play as Adam Wharton would. He's left-footed. He could still play as sort of part of that back 3 in possession, but the issue would be his security out of possession. So that would also not really make him a sensible transfer, as he's not really mobile or particularly disciplined. Now, another option would be to move in the opposite direction. Get someone who is very good out of possession, but not potentially as incredible on the ball. Now, if you watch Carlos Baliba, what you'll know about him is that Baliba is very, very good at carrying the ball forward. He can almost identically do with what Ryan does on the ball. I mean, he's a worse ball carrier forward, but in our own third, in our defensive third, in the middle third, he can essentially replicate what Ryan would do with ball carrying, but he's a much better defender and a much more physical profile of player. Now, the issue is that he doesn't really solve our deep progression issues, which would mean that we would once again have an over-reliance on Alexis McAllister in that regard. But Baliba would be a much better defensive upgrade there and would help with our team's flying fullbacks being so far up that at least we would have a good defender who could cover a lot of the space and do his best Fabinho impression. The issue with Carlos Baliba, again, is going to be that he is very expensive. So, once again, that wouldn't really make him a sensible transfer. My actual sensible pick would be Enzo Barrenechea. Last season, he played at Valencia, and he was signed as part of that Douglas Luiz deal where Villa obtained Samuel Illing Jr., who's tearing it up at Middlesbrough, and Enzo Barrenechea, who they loaned out to Valencia. Enzo is 24 years old, he's Argentinian, and he is a very physical midfielder. He's fairly mobile, roughly no more mobile than the likes of Ryan Gravenberch and Adam Wharton, and he does his best Rodri impression on the pitch. He's very good at tackling, he reads the game incredibly well, and he progresses the ball to a decent level. It's roughly similar to Ryan in terms of ball progression, but he's a very good defender, and there's a chance that Villa would sell for something on the lines of 20 to 30 million, which would be definitely in Liverpool's range. It would make him a very sensible transfer for the 6. He would effectively do what Carlos Baliba does without some of the ball carrying. So of course it would still put the onus on McAllister in possession, but Barrenechea gives you a very good option at the 6 and potential to upgrade on later. But what if Liverpool choose to go in another direction? Instead of signing a player who's very obviously an upgrade in possession in the 6, or a much better defender in the 6, get someone who could play both the 6 and the 8 to just get rid of some of the load on both Alexis and Ryan. So the most obvious pick here for me is Nicola Ravella, because Nicola Ravella is a very good progressor of the ball. He can also carry it forward similar to Ryan, and he's a much better positional and defensive player. At the very least, he would be on the same level as both Ryan and Alexis and would be able to play either role at a very high level, to a point where Arne could even throw him into big games. Ravella isn't the most physical player, nor is he the best athlete, but he can still cover a lot of ground, and you can even see in the statistics that he's in one of the highest percentiles for dribblers challenged and dribblers tackled. You can tell that he can still deal with people who are trying to progress the ball towards him. The obvious problem that you're going to get with someone like Nicolo Ravella is going to be that he also could be too expensive. Lazio have an obligation to buy him from Juve this summer, and it's unlikely that they would immediately sanction a sale unless it was for big money. But you can see the clear benefit. He would be able to replicate the passing in the middle third that Alexis McAllister did, while also being able to receive the ball from the center backs and progress it forward. He would be almost the perfect option for both a 6-8 cover for both Alexis McAllister and Ryan Gravenberch. But because of the price tag, we're likely going to have to look for another sensible transfer that would be in Liverpool's range. So since Ravella would be too expensive, that wouldn't really make him a sensible transfer. So we're going to have to look at an alternative. So my sensible pick, if Liverpool choose to go in this direction, would be Lamine Camara. So Lamine Camara is a very good progressive passer. He's also very good at carrying the ball forward, even though statistics might not show it. This season for Monaco and the previous season for Metz, he's a very physically dominant player. Despite his size, he's very mobile. He's capable of playing the 6, the 8, or the 10. He makes very intelligent passes, and he has very great positioning. The immediate problem with someone like Lamine would be his fit with Alexis, considering the fact that both would be incredibly short in the pivot, because I believe Lamine is about 5'8". But he would be a very sensible pick and would probably not cost more than £40 million, would be definitely in Liverpool's price range, and could cover both positions at a high level. Lamine Camara also has very high potential. His potential is likely higher than both Ryan Gravenberch and Alexis McAllister, which gives us a good option later down the line if Alexis were to leave the club. My two sensible transfer picks in midfield would be Enzo Barrenechea and Lamine Camara. Ideally, we would choose between one of them. In a perfect world, you would go for the likes of Adam Morton, but it's unlikely that he would actually leave Crystal Palace at this stage, unless potentially Lyon get reinstated and Palace would get kicked out of Europe. So let's move to the defense. Now, I'm not going to go massively in depth into how Marc Guéhi is going to play for us, but we can look at some basics. What Marc Guéhi immediately offers is someone who can cover both as a left center back and as a right center back. For the most part, he will be playing in weaker opposition games where we have the ball much more often, so we need more of a ball player than someone like Ibrahima Konate on the right, and he'll play as a substitute or backup in cup games to Virgil van Dijk, with the likes of Joe Gomez probably playing as the right center back. It's unlikely to know if Joe Gomez is actually going to stay fit throughout the season, and it would be rough to have Wataru Endo as your fourth choice center back for any amount of time. It's also possible that Ibu actually picks up another long-term injury during the season, meaning that we'll definitely need someone who can cover the Ibu role in the immediacy. And it would be nice if that person could also cover the Verge role, although it's difficult for a player to match both of those skill sets. Now, this is something that Marc Guéhi can do to an extent, but ideally you would also want a young profile there who could develop into the long-term replacement. So our defensive targets need to be versatile, young, and mobile based on these criteria. Now, if we look at the statistics of Virgil van Dijk and Konate, we can see that Van Dijk is effectively an alien in the world of defending. He boasts a high number of switches, he passes the ball incredibly far, he completes a lot of passes, and he wins an insane amount of aerials. Konate, on the other hand, even though his statistics don't really look incredibly good, Konate is a very aggressive defender, he's front-footed, and he covers for Van Dijk having to push up into the midfield and knock out balls that would go in behind. Konate also boasts a very high percentage of aerials won, so ideally we should look for a center back who also does that. Now, it's important to notice that Marc Guéhi didn't have a high percentage of aerials won, which is why I think he's relegated to be the third choice in certain games where we have the ball more often. But ideally, the Ibu successor and the Van Dijk successor should have a very high percentage of aerials won, and it would be weird for a Liverpool center back to not have that. So the most obvious fit would be Ousmane Diomande. He can very easily cover both the Virgil van Dijk role and the Ibrahima Konate role. He is very technically secure on the ball, and he's a very physical presence. He boasts a high percentage of aerials won, similar to both Van Dijk and Konate, although he's better on the ball than Konate is, and he could develop into a similar ball player like Vert. It's important to recognize recognize that his ball playing statistics are carried more by his carrying than his actual long passing, but his short passing is pretty decent, and I think he could develop the long passing over time. In Sporting, you would often see him sometimes push into midfield or into wide areas in the back three. Some people may be questioning if a Sporting player who plays in a back three could translate to a back two, but he has all of the physical attributes to succeed in the Prem. Now, the immediate issue is that Crystal Palace are likely going to sign Ousmane Diomande once we sign Mark Guéhi, so he's likely not an option this summer. So, who do we look for in a pure Konate successor? For me, the most obvious option would be Christian Mosquera. Christian Mosquera is a very aggressive front-footed defender. He recovers the ball a lot, and he pushes into midfield. He's a very decent short passer, although he's not an incredible long passer, but then again, neither is Ibra. He's very physically imposing. The worry is, of course, that he has a very low amount of aerials won. He actually only wins roughly about 44% of his aerial duels, which is surprising for a 6'2 center back. I do think he could develop this, but this might be one of the reasons our scouting team was put off by him, and why he's likely to join Arsenal this summer. So who would you go for as an alternative? Well, my first alternative would be someone like Joel Ordonez. Now, the beauty of him is that he's very similar to Christian Mosquera in profile, but is potentially an even better passer. He is much better at winning aerial duels, and he's a similar size to that of Christian Mosquera, and he's an elite athlete. The issue is that he plays currently for Club Brugge, and it would be difficult to ask a player to make a step up from a league like Club Brugge, which is barely scraping in the top 10 of European leagues, the Belgian Pro League, to somewhere like the Prem, and it would be likely that we would have to sign him and loan him out for a season or two before he's even close to ready. So because of that, it wouldn't really make Joel Ordonez a sensible transfer. What would be a sensible transfer, in my opinion, would be to go for someone like Koni de Winter. Koni de Winter is very, very stylistically similar to Ibrahima Konate. He isn't the most incredible passer, and he isn't the most incredible carrier, but what Koni de Winter is a very intelligent defender who wins a lot of his aerial duels. In fact, Koni de Winter is so similar to Ibrahima Konate that if I were to bring de Winter in, next to someone like Virgil van Dijk, you wouldn't even see a massive difference between him and Konate, at least for the most part. There are times where de Winter finds himself out of position, or is a little bit too aggressive into the midfield. But for the most part, De Winter holds his line really well and could do a very good Ibrahima Konate impression. And if Ibu were to leave, he wouldn't necessarily be a terrible option as someone who would start and rotate with Mark Guéhi. De Winter would also be a very intelligent pick because it's unlikely that he would be incredibly expensive from Genoa, and he's another player that Juventus cast aside, like Dean Housen, who would translate very well to the Premier League and could easily develop into someone who becomes as good as Konate later down the line. But there's also a chance that Liverpool go in a different direction. What if instead you signed someone who could be a Van Dijk successor, who in the short term could either play right center back, or you relegate Guéhi and Joe Gomez more to the right hand side, and you sign someone who's just purely the Virgil cover, meaning that Guéhi wouldn't really get those minutes potentially at left center back, but would get more minutes on the right. Now, the most obvious option for me would be Konstantinos Kouliarakis. He currently plays at Wolfsburg, and he is a very good long passer. He's very aggressive on the ball. He's very quick. But the immediate problems I have with someone like Kouliarakis is he's not positionally disciplined yet. So I do worry that if Kouliarakis was to play in our team right now, he would struggle to be trusted by someone like Arne Slot. And we would once again likely have to loan him out for a season, meaning that we wouldn't have someone who would immediately help the team. It's also likely that Kouliarakis wants to play at this stage of his career, meaning that we would likely have to sanction a loan. Now, I wouldn't be opposed to Liverpool still buying him as a long-term Virgil van Dijk successor and loaning him out, but he wouldn't really fix the problems that we have now. My immediate logical solution would then be someone like Nathan Zeze. Nathan Zeze was an incredibly strong and physical defender at Nantes last season. He's very young, and he's very technically secure on the ball. He puts in a lot of great tackles. He's very positionally disciplined, and he's a very physical profile. Now, once again, for his size, he doesn't particularly win a lot of aerial duels, but he would be available for roughly 17 to 20 million pounds this season, which would make him an intelligent signing. Now, the problem is that Zeze is likely someone who would want to play football similar to someone like Lenny Yoro versus a player who'd be willing to sit on the bench and learn from Van Dijk, playing roughly 15 games throughout the season total. And the other issue with someone like Nathan Zeze, similar to Konstantinos Kouliarakis, is that they could only play left center back, and ideally you would want someone who is coming in to play left center back but could play on the right if needed. Now, my sensible transfer for this would be Aurel. Now, Aurel was incredible at Young Boys before moving to Eintracht Frankfurt this season. Now, he was injured for most of the season, but the beauty of Aurel is that he has all the tools to develop into a Van Dijk successor. He's 6'4", he's incredibly physical for his age. If you actually watch him play, and I suggest you do, he almost stands out in a pitch when you're watching. Like, it's very clear that he's the player where he is. Like, he's a massive presence. It's very similar to Van Dijk, actually. He's a very good progressive passer. His switches and long pass completion are incredible. I suggest you watch him when he played for Young Boys, because if you see some of the passes that he's completing, sure, it's not exactly like Virgil van Dijk, but it's a pretty decent Van Dijk impression, and he wins a lot of his aerial duels, and in the short term, would be pretty good cover as a Konate backup, but although long term, you would want him to be a Van Dijk backup, considering that he's a very composed and calm defender. Now, there's a third direction Liverpool could go, but it only really fits one player, and that's looking at a Joe Gomez successor. This is likely Joe Gomez's last season at Liverpool, so you could look for somebody who would be able to cover as both the center back in the long term, but as a left back in the short term, because what that gives you an option of is selling both of our fullbacks in both Kostas and Andrew Robertson, and bringing in a player who in the immediacy could play as a left back and cover as a center back during a crisis. The most obvious pick here with the Dutch connection would be Jorel Hato. Now, these statistics are comparing him against fullbacks, but even as a fullback, and this is fullbacks in the Champions League, I'm not even looking at the next big 14, he tackles a lot of dribblers for a left back. He's very good at defending someone one-on-one, although we did see him struggle with this at times for the Netherlands. He wins a lot of aerial duels for a fullback, although he is fairly tall, and he boasts high stats for ball recoveries, tackles, and interceptions. Now, of course, he's in a side that is a very tumultuous in Ajax, so maybe he got more opportunities to make these tackles, but when watching Jorel Hato play, he is a decent tackler who tries to impose himself on games. And what someone like Jorel Hato gives you the ability to do is, if you want him to play left center back, he could do it against teams in cup games, and in regular games, you could very easily play him as a left back instead of Milos Kerkez, meaning that you wouldn't have to have the likes of Kostas Tsimikas or Andrew Robertson in the side, and could have two players who could develop alongside each other, which would definitely be better in terms of squad management. But there is a doomsday scenario. What if Konate actually leaves this summer? What if we fail to renew him and we choose to sell him? If we need a Konate replacement and not a successor, we need them to be aggressive, physical, and mobile now. Someone that we could bring into the squad and would be able to replicate what Konate does to a high level. Now, the most obvious option would be Cuti Romero. Cuti Romero could very easily play as the right center back and potentially on the left. He is a similar level of ball player, if not better than Ibrahima Konate. He's very physical, and he is able to push into midfield and clear the ball whenever needed. He also passes the ball and carries it very well and is very technically secure. Now, the issue with someone like Romero would be aerial duels. Although he's pretty decent for his height of 6'1", he might not necessarily be the best profile. Additionally, there's a chance that Spurs will drive us a hard bargain because of the fact that they don't really have to sell and they're in the Champions League. So in that case, it wouldn't make this a sensible transfer. The other option would be Loic Bade. He is essentially a poor man's Konate. Now, he wins a lot of aerial duels, he's very physical, and he was incredible for Sevilla. And a lot of people might even remember when he was loaned out to Forest and effectively didn't play. But Bade is a very good ball player. He completes a lot of switches, a lot of long balls, he recovers the ball well, he's positionally great. But the only issue with someone like Bade is, even though he fits a lot of the physical attributes of Konate, he doesn't really have the same recovery pace, and there's a chance that he would get caught out on the counterattack, which is something that we're going to face a lot more next season as we move to being a more ball-dominant side. Because of that, Loic Bade likely isn't a sensible transfer either. So my sensible pick would actually be Alessandro Ribeiro. Now, you might be thinking that he's left-footed and I would be playing him on the right. Well, Ribeiro is actually very, very two-footed. He effectively doesn't really have a weak foot. He's incredibly fast. He has good recovery pace. He's a Brazilian international. He boasts really great progressive passing and carrying statistics, although it is in Liga. He wins a high amount of his aerials, he attempts a lot of passes, he recovers the ball well, and he would do his best Ibrahima Konate impression at Liverpool. Another benefit that you get from the likes of Alessandro Ribeiro is that Alessandro, because he's naturally left-footed, could also be a Van Dijk cover, because if you were playing a lot of games next season and Joe Gomez is injured and we don't have Ibrahima Konate, what we have now is a really good group of players where Mark Guehi, Alessandro, and Joe Gomez is a pretty good core of players who could all rotate and effectively all 4 of these players could play both on the left and the right, although we would only really want to see Van Dijk playing on the left. Gives us a lot of good options in the case of an injury crisis and helps future-proof our squad for this season, because we don't really want a repeat of the season after we won the league the first time, where Van Dijk tore his ACL and effectively we were forced to play a backline containing Nat Phillips, Reece Williams, Ozan Kabak, Jordan Henderson. We want to avoid things like that this season. So my sensible transfer pick, if we chose to go in this route, would be Alessandro Ribeiro. So let's look at the attack. So Liverpool's striker target needs to be an elite finisher. He needs to be able to link up play well, and he needs to be a willing runner. The most obvious player to fit this profile would be the likes of Alexander Isak, because Alexander Isak is a very, very good striker. He's potentially the best in the world. What Isak does is, if you're in a situation where we want to build up like this, as I talked about before, what Isak gives you is someone who is capable of linking up play here, although it's not his best position. But if we push into something more akin to this in possession, with Salah here, Florian Wirtz behind, he would be incredible as this channel runner and being able to run in behind. And he would be a very good stylistic fit with the likes of Mo Salah, who would be able to deliver in these very nice passes to Alexander Isak to finish. Now, the obvious issue with signing Alexander Isak is that he would be incredibly expensive. And after the massive outlay for someone like Florian Wirtz, it's unlikely that we would sanction such a move. So, once again, that does not really make him a sensible transfer, although he would be the dream signing. Now, another option could be Julian Alvarez. He could definitely do the link-up role much better than someone like Alexander Isak, although you're less likely to see someone like Julian Alvarez stretch the defense. But if we did choose to go in this shape instead, Florian Wirtz here and Mo Salah here, Alvarez could do a very good job linking up play, effectively playing as a 10, and then poaching the ball and scoring final third. Now, similar to Alexander Isak, Julian Alvarez is going to be incredibly expensive as he just joined Atletico Madrid last season. So once again, that doesn't really make him a sensible transfer. Now, the only other player in this elite bracket of strikers is Victor Osimhen, who, although I would say it would be a sensible transfer and could do the role of Alexander Isak well, while also being a very underrated on-ball and link-up player. Victor Osimhen is likely going to have incredibly high wages that the club might not want to pay, and there's also the issue of 2 players leaving during AFCON, of both Victor Osimhen and Mo Salah. Because of all of the unknowns, it's unlikely that Liverpool would sanction a move for someone like Victor Osimhen, although I do expect him to be high on the list. In fact, we've heard that the list at the moment is Isak, Osimhen, and Ekitike. Now, I want to briefly touch on Victor Gyökeres. Gyökeres would be an incredible channel runner for Liverpool and could easily play in that 2-2-4-2 build-up structure on the left. But the issue would be maybe sanctioning a move for a player of his age from the Portuguese league, as well as the fact that his price tag also might be too high for Liverpool. Now, the name that we hear a lot is actually Hugo Ekitike. Hugo Ekitike, at this stage of his career, is effectively a poor man's Isak. Hugo Ekitike, if we were to bring him in here, would be a very willing channel runner with Mo Salah in this style of build-up, and he'd actually be an even better channel runner than Isak. He boasts higher availability and would likely be cheaper. But the issue with the Ekitike, once again, is that Liverpool don't really like the asking price of Eintracht Frankfurt, and Ekitike is likely 1 year away from being able to play at a very elite level week in and week out. Because of that, he's likely too high of a risk for Liverpool to sanction at this stage. So once again, I wouldn't say Hugo is a sensible transfer. We can now swing back to the other direction. We can look at the likes of Matteo Retegui. Retegui is a very good link-up player, and if you watch him for Atalanta, he's very good at these little back heel flicks and being able to hold up play, draw players into him, and then feed it off to people who are running into the half spaces and in the channels. He would be a very good stylistic fit with Mo, and would also allow Liverpool to have some very fluid interchanges with him, Florian Wirtz, and Dominik Szoboszlai. For me, I would say that if Liverpool had to sign a striker this summer, he would be the most sensible transfer. But I do think that there's actually an interesting alternative that would potentially fix future problems down the line and allow us to get someone like Isak next summer. So my sensible transfer pick for the striker position would actually be to sign Morgan Rogers. Now, a lot of people might be taken aback by signing Morgan Rogers, because for the most part, he's not a striker. At least you wouldn't think of him as one. For Aston Villa, he played on both the left-hand side and the right-hand side during the season. But for Borough, he played as both a 10 and as a striker. Rogers is very capable of being a target man and also holding up play from the opposition. But what he also gives you is In a scenario where Liverpool choose to build up like this instead, he gives you a very fluid option, if even this was the case, to have these three players all rotate: Morgan Rogers, Dominic Szoboszlai, and Florian Wirtz. You'd essentially have 3 10s. And although Rogers isn't particularly fast and wouldn't run in behind, him and Florian Wirtz are both very robust ball carriers and would likely draw players into them, forcing players onto this side of the pitch and allowing players like Mo Salah and especially Jeremy Frimpong to be free on the right-hand side. So this would definitely be a very sensible transfer. And once we do get a striker like Isak, instead, Rogers becomes immediate cover for both Dominic Szoboszlai, Florian Wirtz, and Isak, and even potentially Mo Salah if you'd like to play him on the right. Rogers also gives you the option to be flexible. If you were to get some kind of pacey young winger as a versatile attacker, he could be as part of a double false 9, as could Florian Wirtz with a pacey winger on the left. So he offers a lot of options and would allow Arne Slot to further replicate PSG, as Rogers would do an incredible job as being a player in that Dembele role. And that's why he would be my sensible transfer. Now, you may think that he would be too expensive, but it is likely that Villa will sell a major player this season because of PSR, although they are trying to work around it with their women's team. So the last thing that we're going to look at is Liverpool's forward target. This is just a general forward that we should look to bring in. Assuming that we're selling 3 of our forwards this season, it would be logical for 3 to leave and 3 to come in. Now, the most logical versatile forward would actually be Morgan Rogers. He'd be a very sensible pick, and once again, we could just sign him on top of a striker, although it's unlikely that we could sanction this move if we were to sign one of the top level strikers, unless it was Matteo Retegui earlier. Another option would be Xavi Simons. Xavi Simons could play as a false 9, as both a 10, a left winger, and a right winger. The issue with Xavi Simons is, although he boasts incredibly good statistics in passing, in carrying, and shooting, he's not a particularly physical midfielder, although he is athletic and is mobile. The translation to the Prem would be rough for him, and a lot of people might even call him a flop initially. I would hesitate to also sign a player who would likely cost on the order of £68 million, which is his current release clause, and it may be too expensive for Liverpool. The other option, of course, would be Kenan Yildiz. Yildiz, once again, can play on the left, the right, as a 10 or striker. He would be incredible. He's very young. He's only 20 years old. He's a very robust ball carrier. In fact, I would compare him the most to someone like Morgan Rogers. The issue with someone like Kenan Yildiz is, would he be willing to take a role as a backup for a team like Liverpool when he could start every single game at a team like Juventus? I doubt it, and he would also likely be very expensive, as Juve rate him incredibly highly, probably be a similar price to someone like Xavi Simons. Because of that, I wouldn't really sanction this move either. The other idea would be to go for someone like Tyler Dibling. Dibling's very good at winning fouls and penalties in the final third. He's a very robust ball carrier. He would be able to play on the right and give Salah rests in cup games or meaningless matches, and he would be homegrown, which is very important as Liverpool are potentially going to struggle with the homegrown quota in the future. Now, the issue with Tyler Dibling is that although he's young, although he's athletic, he would be gettable and would likely sign for Liverpool, he's not very versatile. He can effectively only play as a right winger. This doesn't really solve a lot of our problems. Now, although we do have Gakpo on the other side with Florian Wirtz, we may want games where Florian Wirtz is the 10, meaning Gakpo would be the only player playing on the left. Ideally, we want someone who could play on both wings. And because of that, the most obvious pick would be Malik Fofana. Now, assuming Lyon get relegated this season, Fofana would be available for roughly 20 to 30 million pounds, which would be very sensible for Liverpool and wouldn't be a major outlay for the club at all. In fact, if we were to sign someone like Malik Fofana, he could easily play this role where Florian Wirtz is, or Mo Salah. Now, of course, Fofana is more likely to go outside and stretch. Both of our fullbacks are particularly good at underlapping, so it's not like it would be an issue if he was taking up the wide areas. Fofana is a very good dribbler. He's very athletic and very quick. Now, at this stage of his career, he's not a particularly good finisher, and he's also not a very elite passer, but he would likely accept a move to Liverpool because of the idols that he has at the club. He has recently said that he idolizes Sadio Mane. He's two-footed, so he could play on either flank, meaning he'd get decent amounts of game time, and he would be cheap for Liverpool to buy. And if it doesn't immediately work out after one season, there's also a potential to loan him out and then bring him in again. Fofana would be a very sensible transfer as a versatile forward. This is how I think the squad would look next season if we were to make all of these sensible transfers. But I'd like to thank you guys for watching this video. Please remember to subscribe down below. below and follow me on Twitter. Comment and let me know what you'd like to see next. And I also put out a community post talking about if you would be okay with me branching out to more teams on this channel, or if you would like to see me make another channel. Thanks for watching.